But here's the catch. We're finding ourselves in something external, in an image. So our sense of self is actually shaped by how we imagine others see us, by how we appear in the world.
Whoa. So our identity isn't just something that comes from inside, it's also influenced by how we're reflected back to ourselves by the world.
Exactly. And for Lacan, this process is both necessary and potentially alienating. We need those external images to help us form our sense of self, but they can also create a sense of distance from our true selves.
It's like we're always performing for an audience, even if that audience is just ourselves.
Right. And that leads us to another big concept that Coccia explores, mimesis, or imitation.
Now, isn't mimesis usually seen as a bad thing, like a cheap copy?
Often, yeah.
Ah.
But Coccia flips that idea on its head. He argues that mimesis is actually made possible by the way images work, by their very nature as transmittable forms.
Okay, so because images can exist independently, they can be, like, borrowed and copied.
Precisely. Imitation happens because forms are constantly flowing through this sensitive realm,
Yeah.
being shared and reshaped. Coccia even suggests that communication itself is a form of mimesis.
So every time we talk to each other, we're essentially sharing images, whether we realize it or not.
You got it. Think about telling a story. You're not just conveying information, you're conjuring images in the listener's mind. You're inviting them to experience a piece of your world through those shared images.
Wow, that's a really cool way to think about communication. It's like we're constantly building these bridges between our minds using images.
And that brings us to what might be the most surprising part of Coccia's book, the way he connects this whole world of images to our physical bodies.
This is where I get really curious because he's not just talking about the body as a physical object, right? He's talking about the sensitive body.
Exactly. He introduces this idea from Ortega y Gasset called the intrabody.
The intrabody.
It's basically the body as we experience it from the inside, not bones and muscles, but the flow of sensations.
So it's like this constant stream of bodily experiences, always changing, always in motion.
Precisely. And Coccia compares this to William James's idea of the stream of consciousness. Just like our thoughts and feelings are constantly flowing, so are our bodily sensations. And this intrabody is deeply shaped by images.
Wait, so images can shape how our bodies feel?
Think about it. Our senses are bombarded with images all the time. Colors, sounds, textures, smells, all those experiences contribute to how we experience our bodies from the inside out.
So it's not just about how our bodies look, it's about how they feel to us.
Exactly. And that brings us to one of the most intriguing parts of Coccia's book, his analysis of clothing.
Clothing. What does philosophy have to say about fashion?
More than you might think. Coccia argues that clothing is a profound expression of the sensitive body. It's a way of making our inner world visible through these carefully chosen images.
So it's like clothes are a way of wearing our identity.
Exactly. He even calls clothing our second body. He's saying that the clothes we choose to wear actually become part of our sensitive body, part of how we experience the world and present ourselves to others.
It makes me think about how certain clothes can make me feel different, more confident or powerful. It's like they're not just covering my body, they're transforming it.
Exactly. And that transformation isn't just psychological. Coccia argues it's ontological. It's a change in our way of being in the world.
So when I put on my favorite power suit, I'm not just dressing for success, I'm actually becoming more confident.
Precisely. And that brings us to the world of fashion. Coccia sees fashion as this fascinating process of identification through images. We become an image for the world, and in doing so, we shape our own identity.
So it's not just about following trends, it's about actively using clothes to communicate who we are and how we see ourselves.
Exactly. And fashion, just like art or language, is constantly changing and evolving. It's like we're all part of this giant collaborative project, shaping and reshaping the world of images together.
Okay, so far we've seen how images shape our perceptions, our bodies, even our identities. But what about ethics? If we're swimming in the sea of images, how do we navigate it responsibly? How do we make sure we're not just consuming images, but actually shaping them in a way that makes the world a better place?
That's such an important question, and it gets to the heart of why Coccia's work is so relevant today. He's not just asking us to appreciate images, he's challenging us to think about our responsibility within this sensitive world.
So it's not enough to just be aware of images, we also need to think about the consequences of how we create them and share them.
Exactly. And this is where Coccia introduces the idea of a sensitive ethics.
Sensitive ethics, what's that?
Well, it starts with recognizing that we're not just isolated individuals in this sea of images. We're interconnected through this web of sensory experiences and shared meanings.
So our actions have ripple effects. The images we create can impact others in ways we might not even imagine.
Precisely. Which means we need to be more mindful of the images we put out into the world. Ask ourselves, what messages are these images conveying? What impact are they having? Are they contributing to a more beautiful world, or are they reinforcing something harmful?
Whoa, it's like the stakes suddenly got a lot higher. It's not just about personal expression anymore, it's about our collective responsibility for this whole sensitive world.
Exactly. And this sensitive ethics goes beyond just being careful about what we create. It also means being more conscious about the images we consume.
Like being more critical of the images we see in advertising or on social media or in the news.
Exactly. It's about asking ourselves, where did this image come from? Who created it? What's its purpose? And how is it shaping my understanding of the world?
It sounds like a lot of work.
It is, but it's also incredibly empowering. Coccia's work reminds us that we have a choice in how we engage with this sensitive world. We can be passive consumers, or we can be active participants, shaping this world in a way that aligns with our values.
So it's about becoming more intentional, more aware of the power of images.
Exactly. Developing a kind of sensitive literacy.
I like that, a sensitive literacy.
It's about learning to read and interpret images with a critical eye, and to use that knowledge to make more conscious choices about the images we allow into our lives and the images we choose to share with others.
This makes me think about all the images we're bombarded with every day. From ads to social media to the news, it's like a constant stream of visual noise, and I'm not sure I've ever really stopped to think about how it's affecting me.
It's easy to get numb to the power of images when they're everywhere, but that's exactly what Coccia wants to shake us out of. He wants us to wake up to this sensitive world, to become more aware of how it's shaping our thoughts and our behaviors.
So it's about having a more conscious relationship with images, both the ones we consume and the ones we create.
Exactly. And this brings us back to the idea of the sensifying of the spirit. It's about recognizing that we're not just passive consumers. We have this innate capacity to create, to connect, and to transform the world through images.
It's like we're all artists in a way.
Yes, we're all storytellers, world builders. We all have a part to play in shaping this sensitive landscape.
This is a lot to take in, but it's also really exciting. It feels like you're giving me permission to be more creative, more intentional with the images in my life.
That's exactly what I'm hoping for. And that's one of the most powerful things about Coccia's work. He doesn't just leave us feeling overwhelmed by this sensitive world. He empowers us to become active participants in it.
So it's not about rejecting technology or hiding from images. It's about engaging with them more consciously.
Exactly. And using that awareness to create a world that's more beautiful, more just, and more meaningful.
Wow. This whole conversation has been incredibly eye-opening. Thank you for taking us on this deep dive into the sensitive life. It feels like we've only just begun to explore all the implications of Coccia's ideas.
I completely agree, and I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to continue this exploration on their own.
Me too. So before we go, I want to leave our listeners with one last question to ponder. If we really are living in this world saturated with images, what are the images you want to create? What kind of world do you want to build?
That's a powerful question. And as Coccia reminds us, we each have the power to shape this sensitive world. It's up to us to decide what kind of world we want to live in.
Beautiful. Well, that's all the time we have for today, but I hope this conversation has sparked some new ideas and inspired you to think more deeply about the role of images in your life. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Okay, deep breaths, everyone. We're back for the final part of our deep dive into Emmanuel Coccia's The Sensitive Life. And let me tell you, my brain is still buzzing from all those ideas about images, mediums, and the sensitive body.
Yeah, Coccia really packs a lot into this book, but I think we're in a good place now to start exploring some of the bigger implications of his work. Like, how do we actually live in this world of images he's describing?
Exactly. I mean, it's one thing to understand the theory, but how do we put it into practice? How do we make sense of our lives, our relationships, even our place in the universe, in light of all this talk about the sensitive realm?
Well, I think one of the most important takeaways from Coccia is this idea that we're not just isolated individuals, We're fundamentally interconnected, all woven together through this intricate web of sensory experiences.
So it's like we're all part of one giant sensitive ecosystem. Exactly. And that changes everything. It means that our actions have ripple effects. The images we create, the way we interact with the sensitive world, it all impacts others in ways we might not even realize.
It's like we're all responsible for tending to this sensitive garden, making sure it flourishes. But where do we even begin? It feels kind of overwhelming.
I get it. But Coccia gives us some really practical guidance. He reminds us that we have a choice in how we engage with the sensitive world. We can be passive consumers, just letting images wash over us. Or we can be active participants, consciously shaping this world in a way that reflects our values.
So it's not about rejecting images, it's about being more mindful, more intentional about the images we allow into our lives and the images we create.
Right. It's about cultivating what you might call a sensitive literacy.
A sensitive literacy.
Yeah, like a way of reading and interpreting the world of images with more awareness, more critical thinking.
Okay, I like that. So what would that look like in real life? Can you give me an example?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Start by paying closer attention to the images you surround yourself with every day. At home, at work, on your phone. What kind of mood do those images evoke? What messages are they sending? Are they uplifting or are they draining?
You know, I've never really thought about it that way before. It's like I'm constantly bombarded with images and I just tune them out.
It's easy to do. We're so
Yeah.
saturated with images these days. But Coccia wants us to wake up, to become more aware of how those images are shaping our thoughts and behaviors.
So we need to be more critical of the images we see, more conscious of the images we create.
Exactly. And that conscious engagement with images can really transform how we experience the world and how we relate to others.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all connects, but it does raise some questions for me, especially when it comes to relationships. Like, what happens when people have different interpretations of the same images? Or when the images we share with each other start to feel inauthentic?
Those are great questions. And it's true that navigating the sensitive world in relationships can be tricky. It requires a lot of care, attention, and open communication. We need to be more mindful of the images we share with each other, sensitive to how they might be received, and willing to have honest conversations about the meanings we're creating together.
It sounds like Coccia's sensitive ethics is really about bringing more awareness, more compassion to our interactions, not just with images, but with each other.
That's a great way to put it. And I think it's a message we all need to hear, especially in today's world.
I agree. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all the noise and chaos, but Coccia's work reminds us that we have the power to create something different, something more beautiful.
He's reminding us that we're not just passive consumers. We're artists, we're storytellers. We all have the power to shape this sensitive landscape.
And that's a really powerful and hopeful message. Thank you so much for sharing these insights with us. This has been an amazing deep dive into the sensitive life. I feel like I've learned so much.
It's been a pleasure. And I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to keep exploring this sensitive world on their own. There's so much to discover.
Absolutely. And on that note, I want to leave everyone with one final thought. If Emmanuel Coccia is right, if we truly live in a world saturated with images, what kind of images do you want to create? What kind of world do you want to contribute to? Think about it. And thanks for listening.